Chapter 3. A Scoundrel in His Element.
My tax guilder's at work, Heath thought, fuming as he stared at the spoiled, rotten princess he suddenly found himself dependent on. Not that Heath had ever paid any taxes, given his line of work, but it was the principle that mattered. Now that princess was staring wide-eyed at him while her lower lip wobbled up and down like a hyperactive trout. Had she been even 1/10 less unbearable, Heath would have felt like crap. He could feel sweat bubbling up on his skin, as if willing him to just jump overboard, walk away. Anything but threaten this girl and her big hazel doe eyes. But he needed this ship, just for a while. "Throw me off?" she said. "I don't even weigh that much." Heath looked down at Cordetta's feet where the pit of his plum was. He picked it up good and proper-like, being sure to extend his pinky finger, and held it in front of her face. "See this?" he told her. "This is you." Then he dropped it over the edge. Princess Trout continued to fish-mouth at him until he could swear he heard the pit bloop on the surface of the water below. But, she squeaked, "I like working the engine." Her eyes welled with tears, and her deceitfully sweet face threatened to become waterlogged. Now he felt like crap. She was supposed to beg him to land the ship so she could get off. Heath had a plan, and it only involved one person getting hurt. But he did need to go fast, and she really was just going to keep making those dumb hazel eyes at him. Heath clenched his teeth and blew out his breath. "Then get started. We have an appointment with the Stone Man." At least returning the ship when he was done would be easy. Princess Cordetta rushed below, shooting him a cat-like glare over her shoulder. Heath massaged his temples, then rolled out the sails. Even as powerful as that weird engine was, the aid of the wind would be needed. Heath had found during his last piloting shift that the Happily Ever After, seriously, who came up with that name, possessed a mechanism for locking the wheel in place. Shortly after the ship got in motion, he engaged it. With the ship's direction locked in, he waited until the ship reached the desired altitude, about 300 feet, a good balance between fuel efficiency and terrain avoidance, and then locked that in too, along with the forward momentum. The ship would drift slightly off course with this feature, but there was no avoiding it, and the winds looked like they'd stay constant through the night. With that achieved, he took to his hammock to, for the first time in almost a week, sleep the whole night through. Heath's willingness to sleep in such an exposed position around someone he'd stolen a ship from was not the product of naivete. Heath knew the look of a killer from long experience living cheek by jowl with several of them, and Cordetta was so far from one it made him laugh to think about. But she might do any number of other undesirable things, turn the ship around, for example. At least that Heath had a solution for. If the ship deviated more than a few degrees off course, a bell attached to his trusty compass would wake him. Anything else, he'd just have to deal with when it happened. His focus was slipping. He could defer sleep no longer. When he awoke, it was nearly noon. By any reasonable standard, catastrophe ought to have struck several times over. But when he checked his compass, the ship was still on course. And when he checked the surrounding geography against his charts, they were coming up on one of the great old oaks of Lake Geraldine, just like they were supposed to. He thought if the seep ever came for this 100-foot-high specimen, it would have a very hard time indeed. "Good morning, Heath," Cordetta said. She was holding a full mug of that silly drink she held in such esteem. "I made you this." Heath wasn't sure why Cordetta was suddenly being nice to him. She didn't look scared of him, nor was there any chance of poison because she wasn't a killer, and anyway she clearly preferred mechanisms to chemicals. He drank deep. It was good, and spread warmth through his muscles far beyond its temperature. If this was poison, he'd take a gallon of it. Heath finished the drink, then set about taking stock of his new ship. The detailing on the wood seemed finer already, the white trim brighter than it had been yesterday. The two masts and much of the railing was accented royal blue. The mermaid on the front, well, he wasn't about to climb over the edge and look, but she was probably still intricately carved, even if she did have webbed claws instead of hands. The Happily Ever After was not so finely curved at the stern, but it was nonetheless where it kept its most interesting feature. Being a flying ship, her rudder did not spend a lot of time in the water. Since having the rudder in the water was a lot of how a ship turned, she needed something else for the air. That something was the caudal sail, a large trapezoidal sail mounted at the stern, using an L-shaped pair of beams that swiveled with the rudder. Heath had been skeptical when he first laid eyes on it, but it kept the ship nicely on course. If you didn't count the surface of the deck or the depths of the hold, and no self-respecting sailor did, then the Happily Ever After had just one true floor. That was where the engine room, bathroom, extra bedrooms, as well as the ship's kitchen, known as the galley, and its attached pantry were. The deck was split by a set of stairs into the main deck and the quarterdeck, with the latter additionally serving as the roof of Cordetta's quarters. Honestly, she could have them. While the ship was an aristocrat's yacht through and through, a vessel built for pleasure far more than performance, there were several features about her that Heath liked. The engine, of course, seemed a very fine thing to him. There wasn't a maritime patrol in the world that could give him the least bit of trouble in this. The cut of the sails would offer nimble sailing in a pinch, and lastly, she was very well stocked. Heath had been aboard a ship without enough food to feed its crew. He still had nightmares about it. Heath did notice a number of fallen leaves and a bit of dust gathering in the corners, but he resolved to put that out of his mind. Heath wasn't going to have time for cleaning, and he knew that to ask his crew for what it could never do would only undermine his authority. Speaking of his crew, what are you doing up here? He asked Cordetta. The engine's going full blast. I won't have to retune it for another hour. But what are you doing up here? Cordetta looked all innocence at him. Who, me? Heath cast his gaze demonstratively about the ship. Left and right, until even she couldn't pretend not to understand what he was telling her. I'm getting fresh air. Taking in the view. She made a wide, closed-mouthed smile. Did you know that sea roaches never eat during a full moon? Yes, they do. Okay, but they do refrain from mating. No, they don't. And the rivers in the sea flow upward when it rains? Only in the lower levels. There's a whole network of tunnels under Old Duskharrow. It's caused by deposits of black moonjade reversing gravity. That's also not true.
Just because you're bored doesn't mean you're done working.
Go back to the engine room and put together an automatic doily maker or something even more useless. She threw him another slit-eyed cat glare before disappearing back below decks, muttering, Useless? I'll show you useless. Wait. This wouldn't be necessary for much longer, Heath hoped. But Her Royal Highness needed to get it through her head that this was his boat, and he was in charge. Well, the next time she came up to test the uncouth barbarian, he'd look the part. Heath drew his sword and pulled off his shirt. Then he folded it carefully and laid it on a barrel by the mainmast. It was, after all, his lucky shirt. And his only one, if you didn't count the stolen captain's jacket. Heath had found it folded up near the helm, probably the man's spare. Heath took up a high guard stance and worked through a series of overhand cuts and blocks. He hadn't had much chance to practice in the dungeons of Elendale, and he couldn't afford to get rusty. That stupid pimple-faced guard. All Heath had been after were some tools to help with a very specific job, and the little twerp had to scream bloody murder. He hadn't even put up a decent fight. Heath had knocked him unconscious with a single tap to the helmet from the hammer he'd brought to bust open locks, but then several actual swordsmen swarmed the room. Even the stone man couldn't have fought that many and lived to tell the tale. What a shame the wily bastard knew better than to try. Heath switched over from overhand to underhand cuts around the same time sweat began dripping into his eyes. Underhand cuts had less power, but often came as a surprise against less experienced opponents. Honestly, Heath preferred them. He always got a kick whenever someone who'd underestimated him got their comeuppance, even when he knew it would be the last thing they'd ever get. Though, of course, nothing beat the feeling of a true challenge. As if in answer, the rain clouds opened up and a gale blew. Heath sheathed his sword long enough to adjust the heading and the sails. He returned to practice just as a certain rotten princess was finding another excuse to bother him. Heath couldn't wait to hear what it was this time. Hi, Cordetta said. The princess's eyes grew quite a bit bigger as they followed the shapes his sword traced through the air. Her eyes flicked from his sword to his chest, and back again. Each time, those round hazel eyes got bigger. Her lips slid silently apart but remained mercifully still. For a moment, Heath finished his form and faced her. Hi, she said again. Didn't we just have this conversation? Heath asked. Cordetta blinked and looked up at the rain clouds, then at his neatly folded shirt. Does the engine have a problem with the rain? Heath prodded. She made that closed-mouth smile at him again. No, Cordetta answered sweetly. But I was thinking, as long as it's raining, shouldn't we wash our dirty clothes? Heath opened his mouth to decline, but she ran past him and grabbed his shirt,
briefly putting it to her nose before making a face.
This is definitely overdue, she declared. Then she bolted downstairs. Hey, he shouted. That's my lucky shirt. He debated going down and taking it back. Heath smelled a ploy, but to fear the schemes of spoiled brats was beneath him, and fighting them over a shirt was even more so. Besides, maybe she'd decided to turn over a new leaf. Yeah, and maybe the quiet one had decided to go back where he came from. The rain soon intensified, and Heath considered whether the darkening clouds overhead portended lightning. He'd lose a lot of time if he set the ship down. On the other hand, though, the moment when lightning started splintering the sky was already 30 minutes past time to land. Not for the first time, Heath found himself wondering whether he was doing the smart thing. Of course, the world would be a better place afterward, and no one else was going to do it. But he couldn't shake this nagging feeling that he'd miscalculated, that he should turn back, rethink his approach, perhaps do it all later. Also not for the first time, he recognized this feeling as a habit of cowards and lesser men. What Heath swore to do, Heath did. Delays only left room for greater tragedy. He'd keep the ship over water, he decided, and fly a little lower. That way he could land in a hurry if the clouds got ominous. He redid the navigation settings, then went back to his forms. Heath wasn't quite sure how she'd managed it, but Cordetta's shirt was even more soaked than his pants, and he'd been in the rain for a solid hour. She must be really bad at washing things, which, now that he thought about it, made a lot of sense. The sopping fabric clung to her waist and skin so tightly he could make out the light blue lace of her undergarments. Princess Cordetta wouldn't be a half-bad traveling companion, he mused, if she'd just shut her yap, though the part of her mouth and the position of her hand on her other hip suggested that was unlikely. Well, it could be worse. "Heath, shouldn't we land this thing?" said the only person on the ship who knew anything about sailing. Oh wait, that was Heath. The person talking was the other one, the one whose breasts appeared to be trying to glisten their way out of her undergarments. "There's gadgets I'm working on that could be damaged by lightning, and I don't think the Seep Drinker will handle it very well." She'd lost that insincere sweet voice, the one he guessed she didn't even use on royal princes. This must be close to the princess's true thoughts, or at least what passed for such. And what she seemed to think was that this ship was still hers. "Oh no, I'll have to make doilies by hand after all," Heath replied. "Worry less about the lightning, and more about how much I'd enjoy throwing you off this boat." Cordetta stuck her lips out and squinted. "Ooh, so scary," she replied. "But you would never." Heath grunted. "Anywho, the reason I came up is to hang our clothes out to dry," Cordetta continued. "Dry? It's coming down buckets." Cordetta's belly button seemed to cry out for a good poke, but he let the moment pass. "But eventually the rain will stop, and then they'll start to dry." Cordetta took a deep breath to refill her lungs, making her breasts stand up against her soaked blouse. Heath tried squinting, but he couldn't see any nipple. Heath sighed, shook his head, and went back to training. "By the way, you know none of that stuff you stole does anything magical, right?" Cordetta chirped as she pinned up the clothes. "You can't just cram a topaz into a butter knife and expect to slay monsters." Heath's assumptions had lain about halfway between the two extremes. "It'd slay an obnoxious princess well enough," he grumbled irritably. "But you're not trying to slay a princess, are you? You're trying to kill the stone man." Cordetta dropped her voice an octave for that part. "And you think these tawdry gewgaws are going to help with—" She held her hand out for his answer. Heath did not provide one. She pinned up the clothes while Heath practiced forms and fought to keep the rain out of his face. At least he was faring better than Cordetta was. He remembered when the clothes had been his responsibility. As a pirate crew's newest member, he had been very glad when they took on new members, admittedly after losing a few old ones. Still, Cordetta put on a brave face. She giggled, a little too loudly, as she finished with the pinning. "Oh, and Father always said that Falchier was a beginner's weapon? Maybe in the next town we can get you something a little more imposing? Like a..." Heath held his sword up point down and sucked in his breath before ramming it 3 inches deep into the plank at his feet. "So what's the going rate for blue lace these days? I should get some for someone I actually give a damn about." Cordetta took a moment to process that.
Her fingers subconsciously traced the lacy trim.
"What? But this boss doesn't—" "What?" she burst out. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I'm telling you now." Cordetta practically dove back down the stairs. Heath actually did feel a little bad now, and not just because the view had lost something pleasant. Still, he knew she'd use her royal wiles to take back the ship if he let her. Somehow, Heath's domain of expertise lay elsewhere. They sailed through the night again. Well, Heath sailed, because the storm was going to require his constant attention. Cordetta was not kind enough to make him another cappuccino before going to sleep. In the morning, he woke Cordetta for her turn at the wheel. He even tried to make her a coffee, but after a single sip she gave him a suspicious look, like she thought he was trying to poison her. In retrospect, he probably should not have tried to reuse the grounds from yesterday. "See that tall hill?" he told her while she glared at him. "Means we'll reach Guildmere before sunset." Cordetta faked a yawn. "I've seen maps before. Anywho, there's no way anyone will get there from Ellenvale before this ship does. Good thing, too, because the seepstone's getting low again. And what you're low on is sleep. Go on now. All hands go to beddy by now. I can sail this thing all by my little self." Cordetta's smile was as sweet as rancid butter. Her eyes darted to the clothesline before lingering over his chest. Heath awoke to find the ship had again made excellent progress. The familiar landmarks were even closer than he'd dared to hope. Even Miss Princess looked like she was in a good mood, so much so that she'd gone to the trouble of changing up her hair. She'd done it up in some vertical twisty pattern that she'd pinned in place with a clothespin. "Heath," she said, "what do you think? I wanted a new look for my new life." On the one hand, it was much more practical. On the other, the way she'd previously left it to spill over her shoulders had a lot to recommend. "Yeah, it looks great. Wait a minute, he said, as a terrible notion flared up out of his subconscious. Where did you get that clothespin? Cordetta threw up a carefree hand. Too carefree. I just grabbed the first one off the line that I saw. Why? Heath's eyes were already scanning the clothesline, where his shirt no longer was. Cordetta, what the hell? I told you that was my lucky shirt. And it surely was, the scrapes he'd gotten out of while wearing it. Oh no, it was? Well, Mother always said you get back what you put into the world 3 times over, so you're welcome. As Heath continued to glare at her, she tapped her chin thoughtfully. Actually, that might have been my nurse. Or my Cordetta instructor. Can't remember. Anywho, thieves don't deserve luck. Don't you agree? Shrugging coyly, Cordetta flounced away. Heath cracked his knuckles to calm himself down, then stared out at the world below, searching the sky as though his lucky shirt might be only a quick detour away. It was not, and the soft white clouds only reminded him of what he had lost. At such times, there was only one thing that could help. Okay, that's it, Cordetta yelled as she threw open the door of the engine room. Heath, what is that racket? Preparation for combat, Heath explained patiently. Something you wouldn't know anything about. Preppa what? You're just hitting the ladder while whooping like a seep fiend. In addition to the stairs leading from the deck to the below decks, there was a ladder near the bow of the ship. I wanted to practice ladder combat. Never know when it might happen. You've been stomping throughout the ship shouting hi-ya for 15 minutes. By Heath's estimate, it had been at least 20. Breath control is an essential component of any fighting technique. Ugh! Cordetta stomped back to her engine room. Heath continued just as loudly as before, but soon decided the ladder had learned its lesson, and left to practice above decks instead. Now with space to move about, he tried to picture an actual opponent. One of his old crewmates, actually, and the bull-like fighting style he remembered him employing. His opponent fought fearlessly, but Heath had always been faster, and a better student of swordsmanship, then as well as now. He matched every parry and turned every cut. And so his opponent shifted tactics. It happened so subtly Heath didn't even notice it at first, just as he didn't notice the change in the man's face. But Heath no longer saw the obvious lunges and slow swings. Instead, he saw his blade turned aside by incomprehensible tricks, and his opponent's blade came nearer to his throat with every exchange. His face came nearer too, and it had changed as well. There they were, the dark brown eyes he remembered from his boyhood, the laugh he knew so well. Ha! He cried, smashing his opponent's sword aside at last, and stabbing at his heart. But his opponent had never been there to begin with. He vanished, leaving only the ghost of his pitiless smile. Heath, Cordetta said from the bottom of the stairs, are you going to be all right? Yeah, Heath replied. He sheathed his sword and hung it up by the ship's wheel. He rubbed his face. I'll be fine. Can I make you a cappuccino or something? It's just, you're scaring me. The princess still had made no move to ascend the staircase. Heath sighed and sat down on the quarterdeck steps. Yes, thank you, your highness. That would be nice. Cordetta was on deck soon afterward with 2 steaming mugs. This time she'd added cinnamon to them. Did a seep saint teach you how to do that? Cordetta asked. I've never seen anyone move like that. At the mention of the word, the laugh and the eyes sprang back into Heath's head. With such force he flinched right in front of the princess. A seep saint? Take on students? Heath replied, putting the cup to his lips. Even a princess must know what vicious killers they are. They may not all be as bad as the stone man, but they're bastards. Well, yes, Cordetta said. Obviously we learn about those things. Thankfully your drinks are not as bad as your lies, Heath thought. At least, until he drank some. Salt? He said, spitting overboard as forcefully as he could. Seriously? What is your problem? Ingredient control is an essential component of any brewing technique, Cordetta shrugged. You must have knocked some salt into the cinnamon bag while you were banging about with your sword. My sword? Okay, yeah. Heath saw she was drinking hers just fine. So why isn't there any in yours? Cordetta took a long slurp. Sheer dumb luck. Yeah, right. Gimme. As he reached for it, Cordetta took another long slurp. Heath yanked her cup away from her, but only a bottomful of bubbly milk dregs awaited him. Well, I'll clean up then, Cordetta said brightly. She flung the contents of Heath's drink overboard before sashaying down the stairs. In her absence, Heath swirled saliva around his mouth in a mostly futile attempt to not taste salt anymore. Then he got an idea. Did you know the shower hasn't been working this whole time? Heath called from the bathroom doorway. Cordetta poked her head out from the engine room. Yeah, I'll get to it when I get to it. Well, I just got to it. Even got the hot water working. The problem was under the floorboards, just had to pry the right one up to find it. There had been a loose pipe. Heath had set it firmly back in place. It's available now. He stepped out into the hallway and stretched. Cordetta's eyes narrowed as they scanned his smiling face for treachery. Then she dashed off toward the bathroom. Heath couldn't tell whether she didn't suspect a prank or didn't care. If the latter, she'd soon change her mind. Though he had gotten the hot water to work, he'd also used up every last drop of it showering himself. Cordetta would get about 30 seconds of it, just enough to get comfortable. Then, well... Cordetta shrieked in the bathroom. Moments later, a towel-clad demoness with soap strands for hair sprang into the hallway. I am going to put Cordetta seethed through clenched teeth, a snake in your next coffee. Is that really the worst thing you can think of? Heath replied. Not that he could think of worse either, at the moment. Though Cordetta was using her left hand to point angrily in his direction, her right hand served as the vital linchpin holding the towel up, and all that occupied Heath's thoughts was the possibility that she might use that hand to do something else, and that poor towel might fall off. Cordetta marched back into the bathroom and seized a back scrubber from the bathroom, sadly with her left hand, before marching back out and throwing it at him. No, it is not, she shouted, before going back in to rinse her hair. She'd forgive him in an hour when she'd had a proper hot shower, Heath was sure. He went back to steering the boat. Cordetta rejoined him later with a thick book tucked under her arm. She shot him several furtive glances, then sat down on a bench on the quarterdeck. Heath sensed trouble. You know, I find reading to be truly the noblest of hobbies, Cordetta said. Heath, do you read? Yes, Cordetta, Heath said. I do, in fact, know how to read. Oh, Heath, I'm sure you can read. Not so sure you can listen, though. What I actually asked was whether you chose to read. Heath gave that the response it deserved, which was none at all. Well, fear not. The doctor is here, and she's decided to cure you. Licking her thumb and opening to the first page, Cordetta read out, The image of my dead, blood-stained mentor was to be my first glimpse into the shadowy, sultry world of the blood drinkers. Then she kept going. Heath listened, with mounting disbelief, as she went on over the next half hour. Vicandrius fingered my collarbone with his extremely male touch. Nothing could prepare me for how much I loved it, craved it. An hour? No, Tunia, the fault is mine. I let the Blood Council pressure you. I'm such a monster, he said. I don't care, I said, fingering the neck of my invisible silk robe. No, Tunia, you're not safe around me. We can't be together. 2 hours? Only you can restore the blood realm, Vicandrius said. He gave me the dagger which I was to plunge into his heart. Oh, Vicandrius, I said, but what about you? Don't worry about me. I lived 10,000 lifetimes. Then 3 hours. Heath maintained full alertness for whatever prank she had planned next. She wouldn't lull him into a false sense of security. But after 4 hours... Oh, Vicandrius, I said, shuddering as he sank his fangs in and drank deeply. My back arched, urging him to feast. It finally dawned on Heath that this was the prank. Wait a damn minute, Cordetta. What is this ridiculous tripe? Cordetta did not look up, though she did flick a few pages. This was more than a kiss, she continued. Vicandrius's hard body pressed against me, and he slid his tongue hungrily across the tops of my teeth. I didn't just want this. I needed this. Yes, Hey! Enough! Give me that. Heath seized the insipid volume by the spine and tried to tug it out of her grasp, but Cordetta curled around it like a cat protecting its belly. Heath pulled and pulled, but Cordetta had tucked her knees around it, and it wasn't coming loose. Fine, Heath said. You know what? I'm actually kind of enjoying it. Cordetta gave him that smug, froggy smile that came so easily to her. Still, she waited until he was several feet away before reopening the book. I've loved you since before you were born, Tunia, he said. I wanted this, wanted all of him right now on the blood table. I would be his final sacrifice. Heath made his play. He lunged swift and sure and scooped Cordetta bodily up with both hands. Squeezing her tight, he carried her over to the railings of the quarterdeck and dangled her over the edge. She twisted around and slung one arm around his neck. With the other, she clasped that infernal book. Heath! She squealed. Cordetta, that revolting tome is going over the edge, with or without you, he told her. I've had enough of this. No, you can't destroy books. It's wrong. Then why does this feel so right? Heath replied. Cordetta made a series of desperate squirms against his grip, but Heath's determination made him a statue, and his ongoing shirtlessness made him hard to grip. Any longer and the ship's going to veer off course. Just drop it. Cordetta said. Then she went limp. Fine. She extended her arm out into the sky and let the book fall out of her hand. It dropped like a stone toward the depths of Lake Geraldine. Heath pivoted back over the rails like a crane and dropped Cordetta on her butt. Good kitty, Heath told her. And look, the towers of Guildmere approach. Cordetta hissed and skulked back below. 15 minutes later, Cordetta returned. She'd found another puffy-sleeved dress, a white one, over which she'd cinched some sort of combination corset and belt that gave her a waist like an expensive vase. The corset thing had vertical black and white stripes that kept yanking Heath's gaze towards the large black silk rose pinned at the center of the neckline. And topping it all off, literally, was the most preposterously small hat Heath had ever seen in his life. If it hadn't matched the rest of the outfit, he would have said it came from a doll. It was possible some feminine contrivance held it in place, but Heath considered it equally plausible that the magic of one of Cordetta's moonjade gadgets was involved. That's a look, Heath observed. Hoping to snag a vicandrius of your own, are you? You know, that was actually my sister's book, she told him. I found it in her library. Shoot, Heath replied. And I was so sure you'd smuggled it in under your skirt. You owe her a new one. Why? You're the one who dropped it. Cordetta smiled again. Anywho, I just thought you'd like it. I figured you'd relate to the guy. Did you now? Heath swept his arm grandly toward the horizon. So, Princess, you ever see these before? I've read about them. Cordetta rolled her eyes at him before blowing a loud, wet raspberry. Everybody knows about those. Hey, if you don't actually know anything about them, just say so. Heath actually wasn't sure of the real story. He'd heard bits, but wasn't sure how they all fit together. Well, teacher, Cordetta sneered, back in the days of the Quiet One, the merchant families of Guildmere all refused to trust any of the others for mutual defense, so each family converted its own house into a fortress. Only, they didn't have the space, so instead of a castle like Ellenvale has, they just built spindly little towers. Everyone already knows that. You said it yourself, Heath said, fishing further. Everyone but you. Cordetta waved an airy, white-gloved hand in his face. And after the Quiet One was bound, they kept building taller and taller as a way of upstaging each other. Now they're all old and unstable. Cordetta pointed to the tallest of them, a bright marble structure topped with a wooden scaffold and an in-progress sculpture of a very proud, very fat man. You and I could probably pull that one over just by tying the happily ever after to it and letting it drift in the breeze. I take it you're not a fan of Guildmere. Oh no, the people are fine. It's just the merchant families. They've long thought themselves superior to House Mellarine, which they're not. So where are we landing this time? Well, I figure we've moved pretty fast, so it's more or less impossible for rumor to have outrun us. I was thinking we'd touch down in the middle of the southern bay and sail up to the dock like normal people. Guildmere was something of a rarity, in that it touched not one, but 2 lakes. This meant the 2 lakes could functionally act as part of the same market, as long as their merchant captains paid Guildmere's toll, or else as long as one of the merchant families owed you a favor in exchange for certain violent services rendered. Heath debated momentarily whether he ought to let Cordetta in on that aspect of his past. He wondered whether she'd be impressed or dismayed. On balance, probably best he didn't. 2 lakes, Cordetta sneered. Ellenvale borders 3, as long as you count its outlying territories, and ours extend much further out. Can you believe the Guildmerites think they have the better city? Heath decided he picked enough fights for today. No, it's inconceivable. 2 lakes, Cordetta scoffed. I'm going to wind the engine down now. Moments later, the descent began. The happily ever after touched down on Lake Geraldine, in a spray of lily pads and very confused fish. From there it was a matter of taking down the sails, and letting a team of rowboats ease them into dock. Welcome to Guildmere, sir and lady, the tugboat captain announced. I must say, I've heard of these newfangled airboats, but never had the pleasure of servicing one. Till now, 3 guilders. Heath paid the man, and then he paid the docking fee, and the city entrance fee, and the foreign visiting couples fee. Cordetta squawked at each of these, but Heath assured her this was just the cost of doing business here, and what business they would do here.